My name
Being
is
with you
Rebecca
feels so
Sterling, and
right.
I'm
I
58
feel the
years
same
old
way.
now.
Let's
This
not let
story
this
takes
moment
place 10
end.
years ago, when I was 48 and making what I thought was a necessary deception, one that would teach me more about authenticity, worth, and love than I'd learned in all my previous years. I'd been a single mother since my daughter Chloe was 2 years old. Her father had left when he found out I was pregnant. Deciding fatherhood wasn't part of his plans. I'd raised her alone, working multiple jobs to keep us afloat. Waitressing during the day, bookkeeping at night, whatever it took to pay rent and put food on the table. By the time Chloe was 18 and heading to college, I'd spent nearly 2 decades in survival mode. Every dollar went toward necessities. I shopped at thrift stores, cut my own hair, wore shoes until they literally fell apart. I was proud of what I'd accomplished, putting Chloe through school, keeping us housed and fed. But I was also exhausted and lonely. My sister Patricia had been nagging me for years to start dating again. "Rebecca, you've given everything to Chloe. Now it's time to do something for yourself. You deserve companionship. You deserve love." "I don't have time for dating," I'd always reply. "And besides, what would I wear? Where would I go? I can't afford the kind of life people expect on dates." "Then let me help," Patricia insisted. She was comfortably middle class, married to a successful accountant, and she'd always felt guilty that her life was easier than mine. "I'll set you up. I know someone perfect for you." I resisted for months, but Patricia was persistent. Finally, worn down by loneliness and curiosity, I agreed to one blind date. "His name is Christopher Mitchell," Patricia told me excitedly. "He's a widower, 52, with a 7-year-old daughter. He runs a very successful investment firm. He's kind, he's handsome, and he's looking for someone genuine." My heart sank. "Patricia, a successful businessman? I can't date someone like that. We're from different worlds. I'm a waitress living paycheck to paycheck." "So what? You're intelligent, kind, hardworking, and beautiful. That's what matters. But what do I wear? What do I say when he asks what I do? Where do I say I live?" Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that would prove fateful. "Just present your best self. Dress nicely. You don't have to lie, but you don't have to lead with your struggles either. Let him get to know you as a person first." I interpreted present your best self very differently than Patricia intended. For the week leading up to the date, I obsessed over every detail. I borrowed an expensive burgundy dress from Patricia, one that fit perfectly and looked like something a sophisticated woman would wear. I borrowed her jewelry, her handbag. I practiced conversations in the mirror, creating a version of myself that sounded worldly and successful. I told myself I wasn't lying exactly. I was just editing, presenting a version of myself that would give me a chance. That wouldn't make Christopher dismiss me immediately as too poor, too struggling, too beneath his social class. The date was set for a Saturday evening at Meridian, an upscale restaurant downtown that I'd walked past hundreds of times but never entered. Just looking at the menu, online made my stomach clench. The prices were more than I spent on groceries in a week. Patricia did my hair and makeup, transforming me into someone who looked polished and prosperous. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. I looked elegant, confident, like someone who belonged in places like Meridian. "You look beautiful," Patricia said. "Just be yourself." But which self? The real Rebecca in her threadbare work clothes and worn shoes? Or this borrowed version draped in expensive fabric and false confidence? I took a taxi to the restaurant. Another extravagance I couldn't afford, but felt necessary to maintain the illusion. As we pulled up to Meridian's elegant entrance, my heart was pounding so hard I thought I might be sick. The only flaw in my carefully constructed appearance was my shoes. I'd borrowed everything else from Patricia, but we wore different shoe sizes. So I was wearing my own shoes, black flats that had seen better days, scuffed and worn, with the sole separating slightly on the right one. I'd tried to polish them to make them presentable, but they were what they were, the shoes of someone who couldn't afford better. I walked into the restaurant trying to glide with confidence. To own the space the way wealthy people seem to do effortlessly, the hostess greeted me warmly and directed me to where Christopher was already seated waiting. My first thought when I saw him was that Patricia hadn't exaggerated. He was handsome in an understated way. Dark hair with distinguished silver at the temples, kind eyes, an easy smile. He wore a crisp white shirt that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. But what struck me most was how he stood when he saw me, the genuine warmth in his expression. "Rebecca, I'm Christopher. It's wonderful to meet you." We shook hands and sat down, and I felt like an imposter at a table I had no business occupying. The restaurant was beautiful, with soft lighting and elegant decor, filled with the quiet murmur of conversations and the gentle clink of expensive silverware. I'd served people in restaurants like this, but I'd never been a customer. Christopher was easy to talk to, asking thoughtful questions and listening attentively. When he asked about my work, I hedged, using vague terms like consulting and independent projects that weren't quite lies but certainly weren't the whole truth. "And where do you live?" he asked. "On the north side," I said, which was technically true, though I left out that I lived in a studio apartment in the most affordable complex I could find. I asked about his daughter, and his face lit up in a way that was both beautiful and painful. He clearly adored her. "Her name is Sophie. She's 7, bright and curious and fearless. Her mother died 4 years ago, cancer, and it's been just the two of us since then. She's the reason I agreed to this blind date, actually. She told me I seem lonely and that I should find someone to have dinner with besides her. She sounds wise beyond her years." She is. She's also very perceptive. She notices things other people miss. As we talked, I found myself genuinely enjoying Christopher's company. He was intelligent without being pretentious, successful without being arrogant. He talked about his work with passion but also with perspective, clearly understanding that his business, success, wasn't the most important thing in his life. And he asked about me, really asked with genuine interest. What did I enjoy? What were my dreams? What made me laugh? I answered honestly when I could, carefully when I couldn't. I told him about Chloe, about being proud of putting her through college, about the joy of watching her become independent. I talked about books I loved, places I hope to travel someday, the small pleasures of daily life. But I didn't tell him about the financial struggles, the exhaustion, the reality of my daily existence. I kept up the careful facade of someone whose life was comfortable and secure. The food was extraordinary, though I barely tasted it. So conscious was I of using the right fork, of eating at the right pace, of not revealing my unfamiliarity with fine dining. After dinner, Christopher suggested a walk through the nearby park. It was a beautiful evening, warm and clear, and the park was lit with decorative lights. I agreed, grateful to be outside where I felt less like an imposter. As we walked, Christopher suddenly stopped and gestured to a bench. "Could we sit for a moment? I have something I'd like to say." My heart sank. Had he figured out I was a fraud? Was he going to politely end the date? We sat, and Christopher turned to face me. "Rebecca, I've really enjoyed this evening. You're intelligent, kind, funny, everything Patricia promised. But I need to tell you something." Here it comes, I thought. The polite rejection. "I noticed your shoes," he said gently. I felt my face flush with humiliation. Of course he'd noticed. The one thing I couldn't fake. The one piece of my real life that I couldn't hide. "They're well worn," he continued. "Loved, I'd say. The kind of shoes someone wears because they're comfortable, reliable, because they've served well over time. And I noticed something else." I braced myself, wanting to flee but frozen in place. "You've been uncomfortable all evening. Not with me, I hope. But with the restaurant, the formality, the expensive surroundings. You've been performing, Rebecca. Presenting a version of yourself that doesn't quite fit." Tears sprang to my eyes. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have come. I don't belong in places like that restaurant. I'm a waitress, Christopher. I live in a tiny apartment. This dress isn't even mine. I borrowed it from my sister. I can't afford the life you're used to, and I was stupid to pretend I could." Christopher took my hand gently. "Why did you pretend?" "Because I thought you wouldn't want to know me otherwise. Because successful men don't date struggling waitresses. Because I've spent my entire adult life feeling like I'm not enough. And I thought maybe if I could just seem like enough for one evening." I was crying now, humiliated and relieved at the same time. "Rebecca, look at me." I forced myself to meet his eyes. "Those worn shoes tell me more about who you really are than anything you said in that restaurant. They tell me you're practical, that you prioritize substance over appearance, that you make your resources stretch. They tell me you work hard. Shoes don't wear out like that from sitting behind a desk. And the fact that you came tonight wearing them, even though they don't match the borrowed elegance of everything else, tells me you're authentic at your core. even when you're trying not to be. You're not angry that I lied? You didn't really lie. You just tried to present yourself in a way you thought I'd find acceptable. And I understand that impulse, even if I wish you hadn't felt it necessary." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Can I tell you about my late wife?" I nodded, wiping my eyes. Her name was Anne. She came from money, old family wealth, the kind that opens every door. When I met her, I was still building my business. Working 80-hour weeks, barely scraping by. I was intimidated by her world, by her sophistication. And one night, early in our relationship, I pretended to be more successful than I was. I rented an expensive car, wore a borrowed watch, took her to a restaurant I couldn't afford. What happened? She saw through it immediately. And she told me something I've never forgotten. "Christopher, I don't care about the car or the watch or the expensive dinner. I care about whether you're honest with me. Because I can't build a life with someone I don't really know." He squeezed my hand. So I told her the truth. About my struggling business, my student loan debt, my tiny apartment. And you know what? She didn't care. She cared about my character, my work ethic, my dreams. We built our life together from that honesty. "I'm not Anne," I said. "I'm not elegant or sophisticated or from a wealthy family. I'm just someone who's been struggling for so long that I don't know how to not struggle." "Tell me about your real life," Christopher said. "Not the version you think I want to hear. The actual reality of your days." So I did. Sitting on that bench in the park, I told him everything. About raising Chloe alone. About working multiple jobs. About the constant fear of not having enough money for rent or food. I told him about cutting my own hair and shopping at thrift stores, and walking to work to save bus fare. I told him about the pride I felt in putting Chloe through college and the loneliness I felt now that she was gone. I told him about my worn shoes and why they were worn, because I walked everywhere. Because comfortable shoes were an investment. Because I wore them until they literally fell apart. Christopher listened without judgment. Without pity, with genuine interest and respect. "You raised a daughter alone while working multiple jobs," he said when I finished. "Do you have any idea how remarkable that is? How much strength and determination that requires?" "It's not remarkable. It's just what you do when you don't have other options." "No, it's what you do when you have character and love and commitment. Rebecca, you could have given up. You could have made easier choices. But you didn't. You fought for your daughter every single day. That's not just survival. That's heroism." I started crying again. But this time from being seen, really seen, for who I actually was. "I'm sorry I pretended tonight," I said. "I should have just been honest from the beginning." "Maybe, but I understand why you didn't. And honestly, I'm glad we had this conversation. Because now I know the real you, and the real you is far more interesting than the version you were trying to present." We talked for another hour in that park. I told him about my dreams of someday traveling, of taking art classes, of maybe opening a small cafe. He told me about his daughter, Sophie, about rebuilding his life after Anne's death, about his own struggles with loneliness and purpose. "Can I see you again?" he asked as the evening wound down. The real you, not the borrowed dress version. "Maybe coffee next time, somewhere casual, where you feel comfortable." "You really want to see me again? Even knowing I'm a struggling waitress with worn-out shoes?" "I want to see you again because you're a woman who raised a daughter alone, who works multiple jobs without complaining, who has dreams she hasn't given up on despite having every reason to. The worn shoes are just evidence of your journey, Rebecca. They're not something to be ashamed of." That first date led to a second, then a third. Christopher insisted on meeting me at places where I felt comfortable. The local diner where I sometimes worked. The park where I'd walk on my days off. The library where I spent hours reading. He wanted to know my real world, not some manufactured version of it. He never made me feel ashamed of my financial situation. Instead, he respected it, understanding that my choices were born of necessity and that I'd managed to create a good life for Chloe despite limited resources. Meeting Sophie was nerve-wracking. I worried she'd see me as beneath her father, as someone who didn't belong in their world. But Sophie, with the straightforward honesty of children, simply asked, "Are you nice to my daddy?" "I try to be," I said. "Good, he deserves someone nice, and he seems happy when he talks about you." Over time, Christopher and I built something real, based on honesty rather than pretense. He never tried to rescue me or fix my financial situation. Instead, he respected my independence while offering support when I genuinely needed it. "I don't want you to feel like I'm buying you or saving you," he explained. "But I also don't want pride to keep you from accepting help when it makes sense. That's what partners do. They help each other." When we eventually moved in together 2 years later, it was a partnership of equals, despite the disparity in our bank accounts. I contributed what I could financially, but I also brought other things. Emotional support, perspective, humor, love. We married 3 years after that first disastrous date where I'd pretended to be someone I wasn't. At our wedding, I wore the shoes from that first date, the worn, scuffed flats that had exposed my deception and ultimately led to something real. "Why those shoes?" people asked. "Because they represent the moment I stopped pretending and started being real," I explained. "They're a reminder that authenticity matters more than appearance." Now, 10 years later, I look back on that evening with a mixture of embarrassment and gratitude. I'm embarrassed that I felt I had to pretend, that I didn't believe my real self was worthy of love and acceptance. But I'm grateful that Christopher saw through my facade, that he valued authenticity over performance, that he chose to pursue the real me rather than the manufactured version. I still work, though now by choice rather than necessity. Christopher and I built a life together that honors both our histories, including mine of struggle and survival. Sophie is 17 now, and we've added her perspective to our family discussions about worth, authenticity, and what really matters. Mom tried to be something she wasn't on their first date, Sophie tells her friends. But Dad saw her worn-out shoes and knew she was real. That's how you know someone loves you. They see past what you're trying to present to who you actually are. Out of the mouths of teenagers, I've learned that worth isn't measured in bank accounts or fancy clothes or expensive shoes. It's measured in character, in resilience, in how we treat people and how we show up for the people we love. My worn shoes represented years of walking to work, of prioritizing my daughter's needs over my own comfort, of making every dollar stretch as far as possible. They weren't shameful. They were evidence of a life well lived despite difficult circumstances. And Christopher saw that. He saw past the borrowed dress and the careful performance to the woman underneath. Struggling? Yes, but also strong. Limited financially, yes, but rich in other ways. Worn down by years of single parenthood and multiple jobs, yes, but not broken. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd been honest from the beginning. If I'd shown up to that first date in my real clothes and my worn shoes without the borrowed elegance. Maybe Christopher would have appreciated my authenticity from the start. Or maybe I needed that evening of pretense followed by honest confession to teach me the value of being real. Either way, I learned that love, real love, doesn't require us to be anything other than what we are. It doesn't demand expensive clothes or fancy shoes or a polished performance. It asks only for honesty, for vulnerability, for the courage to let ourselves be seen completely. Those worn shoes are in my closet still, though I don't wear them anymore. They're too precious now, representing not just years of struggle, but also the moment when I stopped apologizing for who I was and started accepting that maybe, just maybe, who I was had always been enough. Christopher sometimes jokes that he fell in love with me because of my shoes, not despite them. They told me everything I needed to know, he says. That you were real, hardworking, practical, and authentic even when you were trying not to be. That's the gift of that evening. Learning that our struggles don't diminish us, that our worn-out shoes and borrowed dresses and carefully constructed facades can't hide who we really are from someone who's truly paying attention. And sometimes, when we stop pretending and start being real, we discover that our authentic selves, flaws, struggles, worn shoes and all, are exactly what someone has been looking for all along. That's what my worn shoes taught me. That's what Christopher's ability to see past pretense showed me. And that's what 10 years of genuine partnership has confirmed. That love doesn't require us to be perfect or wealthy or polished. It just requires us to be real. And that, I've learned, is more than enough.